In this video, we'll examine the cases of all the criminals who, after committing horrific crimes, were executed in the state of North Carolina. Since the death penalty was reinstated in the United States in 1976, following a temporary suspension by the Supreme Court, a total of 43 individuals have been executed in this state. Welcome to Criminal Records. James William Hutchins. James William Hutchins was an American murderer convicted of killing 3 law enforcement officers in North Carolina in 1979. He was also implicated in a 1954 homicide in New Mexico and was suspected in a 3rd state. On May 31, 1979, Hutchins assaulted his teenage daughter during a domestic dispute in Rutherford. When officers Roy Husky and Owen Messersmith arrived, Hutchins shot and killed them both with a rifle from inside his home. He then fled in his car, armed. Due to failures in the sheriff's dispatch system, no alert was issued in time. Later, State Patrol Officer Robert Pete Peterson initiated a pursuit after spotting Hutchins' car speeding, unaware of the earlier murders. When Peterson stopped him, Hutchins murdered him as well. Hutchins was captured on June 1, 1979, after an intense search involving more than 200 local, state, and federal agents. He was tried and sentenced to death. His execution was delayed by several appeals, including one challenging the exclusion of jurors opposed to the death penalty. The U.S. Supreme Court narrowly rejected his appeal by a 5-4 vote, drawing strong criticism for the speed of the decision. He was eventually executed by lethal injection in North Carolina on March 16, 1984. His last meal was a meat sandwich and a soft drink. He did not make any final statement. The case led to reforms in communication protocols between state law enforcement agencies. Velma Barfield. In the 1970s, Velma Barfield caused the death of her boyfriend, Roland Stewart Taylor, by poisoning him with arsenic in his tea and beer. However, investigations revealed that her story was much darker, as she was also implicated in the death of her ex-husband, Jennings Barfield, in 1970. In 1976, Velma began working as a caregiver at a nursing home, where she was involved in several suspicious deaths of the people she cared for. Among them were her mother, Lillian Bullard, who died suddenly in 1974, and Dolly Edwards and her husband Montgomery Edwards, who both died under suspicious circumstances in 1977. It was at this nursing home where suspicions about Velma began, as it was discovered that she had been involved in the deaths of Dolly and Montgomery Edwards. When the body of her ex-husband, Jennings Barfield, was exhumed, it was also found to contain arsenic. This eventually led to her arrest. During Velma's trial, she was only judged and convicted for the death of Roland Stewart Taylor. She was sentenced to death and held in a North Carolina prison, where she became the only woman on death row at that time. On November 2, 1984, hours before her execution, she requested as her last meal a bag of cheese doodles and a Coca-Cola. During her final moments, dressed in pink pajamas and an adult diaper, her last words were, "I know everyone has gone through a lot of pain. All the families are connected, and I am sorry, and I want to thank everyone who has supported me through all of these 6 years." After receiving the lethal injection, doctors confirmed her death hours later. Velma Barfield became the first woman executed in the United States after the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976. John William Rook. On May 12, 1980, John William Rook, aged 23, abducted 25-year-old nurse Anne Marie Roche as she walked home along Avent Ferry Road in Raleigh. Driving a borrowed Mercury, Rook blocked her path, assaulted her with a tire iron, and forced her into the vehicle. He drove her to a secluded area where he raped, beat, slashed, and ultimately ran her over with the car. An autopsy revealed sand in her lungs. She had been buried alive. Witnesses reported the car and gave a description of Rook, including his waist-length blonde ponytail. He was arrested within days and confessed, though his defense later claimed the confession was coerced. Blood evidence and tire tracks linked him directly to the crime. In 1981, Rook was convicted of first-degree murder, rape, and kidnapping. The prosecution focused on the crime's brutality. The defense presented evidence of Rook's abusive childhood and drug use, but the jury found aggravating factors, felony murder and cruelty, and sentenced him to death. Despite appeals from mental health advocates, North Carolina Governor Jim Martin denied clemency. The state's Board of Pardons and Paroles upheld the sentence. In his last meal before execution, Rook requested 12 chili and cheese hot dogs but ate only 3. He entered the death chamber at Central Prison wearing a Harley-Davidson t-shirt, jeans, and dingo boots. At 2:11 a.m. on September 19, 1986, John William Rook was executed by lethal injection. His final words were, "Freedom, freedom, at last, man. It's been a good one." Michael Van McDougall. On August 21, 1979, Michael Van McDougall, a 24-year-old under the influence of nearly 5 grams of cocaine, committed a brutal attack in Charlotte, North Carolina, after deceiving his neighbors Diane Parker and Vicki Dunno into letting him into their home. Once inside, he fatally stabbed Diane 22 times and seriously injured Vicki, who survived and later testified against him. McDougall had a prior rape conviction from 1974 and a history of childhood trauma, including witnessing his grandfather's suicide, his father's murder, and enduring abuse from his mother. He was sentenced to death in 1980 and, after over a decade of unsuccessful appeals, was ultimately executed. Just hours before his execution, McDougall requested to be baptized and receive communion. The prison granted his request. He was baptized around 11 p.m. by Luther Pike, the prison's chief chaplain and a Baptist minister. At 1 a.m., he was removed from his death watch cell, strapped to a gurney, covered with a green sheet, and taken to the execution chamber. Earlier that evening, he met with his mother and stepfather, Randall and W.P. Fresh, who had traveled from Georgia, along with his attorneys and several prison ministers. At 5:30 p.m., he was served his final meal, 2 ribeye steaks with French fries. His family left around 10 p.m., and McDougall stayed with his lawyers until 1 a.m., when IV lines were inserted. Inside the execution chamber, he gave a brief final statement. "I just want to say, overall, I really appreciate the prison staff being kind to my family. And that's it." His last word, just before the injection began, was simply, "Okay," as he appeared to wink at his lawyer. The execution began at 2:19 a.m. on October 18, 1991. About a minute later, his head moved slightly, then went still. He was pronounced dead at 2:20 a.m. John Sterling Gardner, Jr. On the night of December 23, 1982, after consuming alcohol and crystal meth, Gardner drove around Winston-Salem with his girlfriend and a friend before deciding to rob the steak and ale restaurant. Armed with a shotgun, he entered through the back door around midnight and demanded money. Inside, he shot and killed employee Jeffrey Adams and then executed Vicki Miller, despite her pleas for mercy. Gardner fled with $2,696.55, which he used to buy a car, a fur coat, and a puppy for his girlfriend. Witness Linda Kane saw him fleeing and later identified him. After initially denying involvement, Gardner failed a polygraph and confessed in detail to both murders. Gardner was tried on 2 counts of first-degree murder beginning September 19, 1983. Despite his earlier confessions, he recanted at trial and presented an alibi defense, claiming he had confessed only to protect his girlfriend, and that he knew details of the crime from police suggestions and secretly viewing crime scene photos while in custody. He was convicted by the jury on both counts under the felony murder rule. He was sentenced to death on September 23, 1983. John Sterling Gardner Jr. was executed by lethal injection at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina, on October 23, 1992, at 2 a.m. He was 34 years old at the time of his death. The execution was witnessed by the families of both victims, Dick and Diane Adams, and David and Charlotte Miller. In his final statement, Gardner declared his innocence, saying, "I feel deep regret and sorrow for the victims' families. Though they believe that I did what I was convicted of, I did not. But I feel sorry for them, that's all." The lethal injection began at 2 a.m., and Gardner was pronounced dead 14 minutes later. David Lawson. On December 4, 1980, 24-year-old David Lawson broke into the home of Wayne Shin near Concord, North Carolina, after hearing rumors that the residence possessed gold and jewelry. When the burglar alarm went off, Wayne and his father Buren rushed to the scene and found Lawson's vehicle in the driveway. As Wayne entered the house, Lawson shot him in the back of the head at close range. He then pursued Buren, ordering him out of his truck and shooting him as well, though Buren survived. Lawson was charged with first-degree murder, assault with intent to kill, and burglary. The case was largely based on Buren's identification and a woman who testified that Lawson had confessed to the crime. After being found guilty on all charges, the trial proceeded to the sentencing phase, where Lawson shocked the court by requesting the death penalty. Declaring his innocence, he stated he would rather be executed than spend his life in prison for a crime he claimed he didn't commit. "I want the death penalty," he told the jury. "If you think I did it, gas me." Despite his attorney's pleas to reconsider, Lawson stood by his demand. On June 23, 1981, Lawson was sentenced to death. The North Carolina Supreme Court upheld his conviction and death sentence on April 30, 1984. In 1988, the United States Supreme Court denied his petition for certiorari, allowing the death sentence to stand. David Lawson was executed by lethal gas at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina, on June 15, 1994, at 2 a.m. He was 38 years old. Lawson chose the gas chamber over lethal injection, stating that selecting a method would be like approving his own execution. The execution was witnessed by family members of the victims, including Wayne Shin's brother, Jerry Shin, and sister Carolyn Klutz. After the execution, Klutz expressed anger at the justice system for allowing Lawson 2 appeals to the U.S. Supreme Court. In his final written statement, Lawson said, "I am a human being, no more and no less than any other. The state of North Carolina has no more right to take my life than I had to take Wayne Shin's. I regret killing Wayne Shin. I hope North Carolina someday regrets killing me." Wearing only white underwear, a diaper, and socks, Lawson's face was covered and the chamber sealed. He began shouting, "I'm human, I'm human," though the words were hard to hear through the double-glass window. He continued yelling for about 5 minutes as cyanide gas filled the chamber. At 2:01 a.m., he convulsed, his skin turning red, then pale. He vomited around 20 times and stopped moving at 2:14 a.m. He was declared dead at 2:18 a.m. Kermit Smith Jr. On the night of December 3, 1980, 23-year-old Kermit Smith Jr. abducted 3 North Carolina Wesleyan College cheerleaders, Willette Collins, Dawn Killen, and Yolanda Marie Woods, at gunpoint as they left a basketball game in Rocky Mount. He forced Killen and Woods into the trunk of his car and made Collins ride in the front seat. Smith then drove them approximately 30 miles to an abandoned gravel pit in Weldon, North Carolina, where he held them for hours, subjecting Collins to psychological torment and a brutal sexual assault while her friends remained locked in the trunk. After the assault, Smith forced Collins to remain naked outside in freezing temperatures, mocking her pleas for warmth. Eventually, he bludgeoned her with a cinder block, fracturing her skull, and dragged her body to a quarry pond where he tried to weigh it down by placing her feet inside the block. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. Smith was charged with first-degree murder, second-degree rape, and common law robbery for his crimes against Willette Collins. The prosecution's case was built on the testimony of the two surviving victims and physical evidence from the crime scene. The jury determined that the aggravating circumstances outweighed the mitigating circumstances and recommended that Smith be sentenced to death. He was formally sentenced to death in March 1981. Kermit Smith Jr. was executed by lethal injection at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina, on January 24, 1995 at 2 a.m. He was 37 years old at the time of his death. Smith became the seventh person executed in North Carolina since the death penalty was reinstated in 1977. At the time of his execution, Smith was noted as being just the second white person. According to available records, Smith was given the opportunity to make final comments before his execution, which were recorded as part of the standard execution protocol. However, the exact text of his final statement has not been preserved in the available documentation. Executed for the murder of a black victim since capital punishment was reinstated in 1976. Philip Lee Engel. On July 28, 1991, at age 29, Philip Lee Engel brutally murdered William Fred Davis, 68, and his wife Margaret Shufford Davis, 67, in their rural home in Rutherford County, North Carolina. The elderly couple was beaten to death with an axe handle in their own residence, where they had lived quietly for years. The Davises had allowed Engel to rent a mobile home on their property approximately 150 yards from their house since 1987, making him a familiar presence in their lives. 6 weeks later, on September 8, 1991, Engel struck again, this time targeting another elderly couple in nearby Gaston County. E.Z. Willis, 70, and his wife Sarah, 67, were bludgeoned to death with a tire iron in their home in Cherryville. These brutal murders terrorized the small North Carolina communities and sent shockwaves through the region. Before his arrest, Engel made a chilling confession to a friend, admitting to the murders and revealing his disturbing psychology. According to authorities, he told his friend that he enjoyed watching people die in agony. This confession provided crucial evidence that would later be used against him in court. Engel was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of both couples. He was initially indicted by a Rutherford County grand jury on October 14, 1991, for the murders of William Fred Davis and Margaret Shufford Davis. He was later sentenced to death in 1992. Philip Lee Engel was executed by lethal injection at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina, on September 22, 1995, at 2 a.m. He was 34 years old at the time of his death. The execution was witnessed by 6 official witnesses and 4 media representatives, as was standard protocol for North Carolina executions. As he was being wheeled into the death chamber on a gurney, Engel shouted, "I'm going to heaven." His final statement before the execution was, "I do not believe in capital punishment, but I waived my appeals so that the families of the victims can find some peace and bring closure to what happened." Ricky Lee Sanderson. On March 14, 1985, 27-year-old Ricky Lee Sanderson abducted 16-year-old Sue Ellen Holloman, who was home alone in Davidson County, North Carolina. That day, Sue Ellen had stayed home from school due to illness and was last seen by her father around 12:30 p.m. Sanderson took her to a remote location where he sexually assaulted her, strangled her, and stabbed her 3 times in the chest. He then buried her body in a shallow grave. A month later, on April 15, 1985, a farmer plowing a field east of Lexington discovered Sue Ellen's body. Both Ricky Sanderson and Elwood Jones were initially convicted of the crime. However, Sanderson later confessed to being the sole person responsible for Hollyman's murder. His confession cleared Elwood Jones, who had been coerced by aggressive police officers into signing a false confession. Sanderson was formally charged in Davidson County on March 3, 1986, with first-degree kidnapping and murder. He pleaded guilty to both charges on April 7th of the same year and was sentenced to death. What made his case unusual was his decision not to appeal the sentence. Sanderson believed that prolonging the legal process would only cause more suffering to the victim's family. For this reason, he was considered a volunteer for execution, a category representing about 10% of all executions in the United States since 1976. Ricky Lee Sanderson was executed in the gas chamber at Central Prison in Raleigh on January 30, 1998 at 2 a.m. He was 38 years old. He chose lethal gas over lethal injection, arguing it would be a more painful method. A decision believed to be made out of respect for Sue Ellen's father, Hugh Holliman, who planned to witness the execution. In his final days, Sanderson had become deeply religious. He refused his last meal as a symbolic protest against abortion, saying, "Those babies never had a first meal, so I won't take a last one," in their memory. That same year, Congress had passed the controversial Partial Birth Abortion Ban Act, and his gesture received wide media coverage. Despite this protest, shortly before his execution, he requested a honey bun from the prison commissary. His last words within minutes of being executed were, "I'm ready to be set free, set me free. Jesus, I'm coming to meet you in heaven." Sanderson's execution marked a milestone in North Carolina's penal history. It was the last to be carried out in the state's gas chamber. During the removal of his body, 2 guards entering with air tanks experienced a safety incident. One tripped and momentarily loosened the other's tank. This accident led state authorities to permanently discontinue the use of the gas chamber, citing risks to prison staff. John Thomas Noland Jr. On the evening of February 21, 1982, at age 33, John Thomas Noland Jr. carried out a planned murder spree targeting his estranged wife's family members in Charlotte, North Carolina. The attack began when Noland entered the home of Cynthia Milton, his wife's sister, through the back door. As Cynthia was watching television with 2 friends in the living room, Noland chased her into the laundry room, yelling, "I told you not to get involved." While she huddled behind the laundry room door, he shot her in the back of the head, killing her instantly. Directly after murdering Cynthia, Noland walked across a vacant lot to the home of his estranged wife's parents, Mary and Troy Milton. He entered a bedroom and shot Troy Milton in the face while he slept, killing him. Noland then pushed open the door to a second bedroom and told Mary Milton, "I told you I was going to kill all 3 of you. And I've already killed Cindy and your old man. I'm going to get you." When Mary lunged at him with a bar stool, Noland shot her at point-blank range, inflicting a non-lethal wound. She fell to the floor and remained very still, which likely saved her life. After Noland left, Mary called Cindy's house and discovered from her guests that Cynthia had been shot, then immediately contacted the Charlotte Police Department. In October 1982, a jury found Noland guilty of first-degree murder in the deaths of Cynthia and Troy Milton. He was also convicted of 2 counts of first-degree burglary and 1 count of assault with a deadly weapon with intent to kill. The jury returned sentences of death for both murders, with consecutive life sentences for each burglary conviction and 20 years for the assault conviction. John Thomas Noland Jr. was executed by lethal injection at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina, on November 20th, 1998, at 2 a.m. He was 50 years old at the time of his death. The execution was witnessed by 6 official witnesses. According to one source, Noland's final statement included the words, "Freedom, freedom at last, man." However, the exact text of his complete final statement has not been preserved in the comprehensive documentation available. James David Rich. On August 8, 1994, at age 29, James David Rich fatally stabbed Paul Sanford Gwynn, 45, another inmate at the Eastern Correctional Institution in Maury, North Carolina. Rich was already serving a life sentence for a previous murder when he deliberately killed Gwynn with a homemade knife in the prison yard. According to witness testimony, Rich had been offering to put a hit on someone because he desperately wanted to be transferred from the Eastern Prison Facility to Central Prison, believing that killing another inmate would result in his transfer. The murder occurred during an altercation that Gregory Bagley, another inmate, witnessed from beginning to end. Bagley testified that Rich approached Gwynn in the prison yard and demanded money. When Gwynn responded that he did not know what Rich was talking about and that he did not have his money, Rich pulled a knife out of his pants, attacked Gwynn. She attempted to flee, but Rich chased him down and stabbed him at least twice in the back, killing him. Following the stabbing death of Paul Gwynn, Rich was indicted on October 31, 1994, for first-degree murder. The case took an unusual turn when Rich requested to represent himself, a motion that was granted by Judge James Llewellyn on May 15, 1995. However, standby trial counsel was appointed to assist him during the proceedings. On August 15, 1995, Rich pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, acknowledging his responsibility for Gwynn's death. He was sentenced to death in August of the same year. One day before his execution, Rich ate pizza with cheese, black olives, banana peppers, and mushrooms, accompanied by 4 soft drinks, at approximately 5:15 p.m. on the day of his execution. James David Rich was executed by lethal injection at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina, on March 26, 1999, at 2 a.m. He was 34 years old at the time of his death. When asked if he had any last words, Rich said, "All praise and glory be to Allah. May He bless this whole world with peace and His utmost blessings, and may He bless this world with His utmost mercy." Harvey Lee. On December 19, 1983, at age 22, Harvey Lee Green Jr. entered Young's Cleaners in Bethel, North Carolina, armed only with a toy gun, in an attempt to commit robbery. The small dry cleaning establishment was staffed by 17-year-old Sheila Marlene Bland, a high school student working as a cashier, and 33-year-old John Michael Edmondson, a church organist who was a customer at the time. When Green left the store, both victims were dead, having been beaten to death with a pipe that Green found at the scene. The murders occurred during what began as an unplanned robbery in the small town of Bethel in Pitt County. Green, who had recently received a bad conduct discharge from the U.S. Army following a court-martial, was a penniless substance abuser who had returned to his hometown with few prospects and limited skills. Within weeks of the murders, Green confessed to the crimes to police. His cooperation with law enforcement was extensive. He showed police where he had hidden the murder weapon and turned over the blood-splattered pants he had worn during the killings. The pipe was recovered from the yard of a residence located between the Cleaners and Green's residence on December 30, 1983. He was tried and sentenced to death in August 1984. Harvey Lee Green Jr. was executed by lethal injection at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina, on September 24, 1999 at 2 a.m. He was 38 years old at the time of his death. Green entered the execution chamber at 1:50 a.m. and lethal drugs were administered at 2:01 a.m. Warden Robbie Lee pronounced Green dead at 2:16 a.m. In his final statement, Green expressed remorse and asked for forgiveness from the victims' families, some of whom witnessed the execution. He said, "I'd like to let the public know that the wrong they're doing now, it compounded the wrong I did years ago. It ain't no justification. Ain't no fairness. That's all I got to say, and they know it's right." According to another source, he also stated, "I have always been sorry for the taking of your loved ones from you, and I only ask that you forgive me. I pray that you'll have peace of mind." The execution was significant, as it made Green the first African American to be executed in North Carolina since the state reinstated the death penalty in 1977. He was also the first African American executed in the state since 1961. This occurred despite the fact that 54% of North Carolina's death row inmates were black, in a state where African Americans comprised only 22% of the general population. Arthur Martin Boyd Jr. In August 1982, Arthur Martin Boyd Jr., 36 years old, committed the crime that would define the rest of his life: the murder of his ex-partner, Wanda Phillips Hartman, in Mount Airy, North Carolina. After a relationship of more than 3 years and a recent breakup, Boyd harassed and threatened Hartman until, on August 7, 1982, he stabbed her 37 times in front of witnesses, including the victim's young daughter. He was arrested at the scene, tried, and sentenced to death for first-degree murder. On March 22, 1983, the jury in the Surry County Superior Court found Boyd guilty of first-degree murder. For more than 16 years, Boyd remained on death row, exhausting all his legal appeals. One day before his execution, he was offered his last meal. Arthur Martin Boyd Jr. chose 2 bacon and mushroom sandwiches from Wendy's, along with half a liter of chocolate milk. On Thursday, October 21, 1999, at 2 a.m., Boyd was taken to the execution chamber at Central Prison in Raleigh. He was 53 years old at the time of his death. The execution was carried out by lethal injection, with no intervention from Governor James B. Hunt, Jr. Strapped to the execution gurney, he was asked if he had any final words. Boyd responded, briefly and personally, "I love you, Laura." The execution was carried out according to standard protocol. Boyd was immobilized and administered the lethal injection. The procedure proceeded without visible incident or signs of suffering. Death was officially declared a few minutes after the drugs were administered, at 2 a.m. David Jr. Brown. On August 24, 1980, when David Jr. Brown was 32 years old, he committed a brutal double murder at the married quarters apartments in Pinehurst, North Carolina. The victims were Shelley Diane Chalflynch, 26 years old, and her daughter Christina, just 9 years old. Brown, who worked as a chef at the Pinehurst Hotel, attacked both with multiple stab wounds on a night marked by his excessive consumption of alcohol and amphetamines, leaving a scene of extreme violence and mutilation in the apartment where the events occurred. On the night of the crime, Brown had attended a party where he consumed large amounts of alcohol and at least 5 amphetamines. Around 2:10 a.m., he was seen walking barefoot and staggering along the road, and was taken back to the hotel where he worked. However, shortly after, he left the place and committed the double murder. The bodies were found the next day, August 26th, in horrific conditions. Diane Chalflynch had about 100 stab wounds, severe mutilations, and defensive injuries, while her daughter had multiple cuts and an electrical cord wrapped around her neck. Brown was arrested and brought to trial in December 1980. During the process, he was convicted of first-degree murder for the deaths of both victims. After a separate sentencing phase, the jury decided to impose the death penalty for each murder. the North Carolina Supreme Court upheld both convictions and sentences. During his time in prison, Brown converted to Islam, adopting the name Dawood Abdullah Mohammed, but maintained his innocence throughout all appeals. For his last meal on death row, there is no specific record of what David Jr. Brown requested, although North Carolina regulations allowed inmates to request a special meal before execution. He was executed by lethal injection on November 19, 1999, shortly after 2 a.m., at the Central Prison in Raleigh at the age of 51. The execution was carried out without technical complications and in the presence of several family members of one of the victims. When asked for his last words during a recent interview before his execution, he said, "It is my belief, a very well-founded belief, that whatever happens on Friday is meant to be. My soul was prepared a long time ago. I have put this in the hands of God and in the hands of Governor Hunt. That is all I can do. All I can say to the family is that I'm sorry for their loss, but I did not do this. I did not kill Diane or her daughter. I do not believe the people of North Carolina would want that on their consciences, killing an innocent man." Michael Earl Sexton. On August 8, 1990, when Michael Earl Sexton was 23 years old, he committed the kidnapping, rape, and murder of Kimberly Cruz, a 29-year-old counselor specializing in child abuse who worked at Wake Medical Center in Raleigh, North Carolina. Sexton, employed in the hospital laundry, intercepted Cruz in the parking lot as she was heading to her minivan and took her to a wooded area where he brutally attacked her, leaving overwhelming physical evidence that confirmed his involvement in the crime. That afternoon, Sexton disappeared from his job shortly before the shift change. He was later seen arriving soaked and running back to work, which caught the attention of his supervisors. The evidence found was irrefutable: muddy shoe prints inside the victim's minivan, fibers from his clothing on Cruz's dress, and Sexton's hair and semen in the vehicle and on the woman's body. Additionally, personal belongings of Cruz were found in a ditch near Sexton's residence, and it was determined that he withdrew money from Cruz's bank account after the murder. Kimberly Cruz's body was found shortly after midnight on August 9th in the back seat of her minivan. On September 10, 1990, a grand jury formally indicted Sexton for first-degree murder, rape, kidnapping, and robbery, among other charges. During the 1991 trial, Sexton claimed the sexual relations were consensual and that he killed Cruz after an argument. However, on September 24, 1991, he was found guilty of all charges. The jury recommended the death penalty, along with additional sentences amounting to several decades in prison for the other crimes committed. For his last meal on death row, Michael Earl Sexton requested a Philadelphia cheesesteak sandwich accompanied by a Pepsi. He was executed by lethal injection shortly after 2 a.m. on November 9, 2000, at Raleigh Central Prison, North Carolina, at the age of 34. There was no intervention by the governor nor complications during the execution. When asked for his last words, Sexton did not make any statement. However, before losing consciousness due to the lethal drugs, he turned his head to look at the witnesses present. He was pronounced dead at 2:34 a.m. The family of Kimberly Cruz, who had been vocal in their support of the execution, was present during the procedure. Willie Irvin Fisher. On the night of April 1, 1992, Willie Irvin Fisher, 30 years old, carried out a brutal attack against his girlfriend Angela Johnson, 29, in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. The couple had maintained an on-and-off relationship for 7 years and had a 4-year-old son together. The events began when Fisher arrived at the residence where Angela lived with her family, and after a prior altercation, he returned intoxicated with alcohol and crack cocaine to violently break into the house, attacking Angela with a knife as she tried to flee, resulting in her death after receiving multiple wounds. After an initial assault around 9 p.m. and Angela's escape, Fisher spent hours consuming alcohol and drugs with a friend until about 4 a.m. on April 2nd. Shortly after, he called Angela's home from his friend's residence and violently entered by breaking the glass of the door, chasing and stabbing Angela in the living room and outside the house until a neighbor intervened by firing a warning shot, which caused Fisher to flee. The autopsy confirmed Angela received around 32 stab wounds, as well as additional injuries caused by a broomstick used in self-defense, dying as a result of these multiple wounds. Fisher hid in the nearby woods, but eventually surrendered to the police on the afternoon of April 2nd. He was formally charged with first-degree murder, burglary, and assault with a deadly weapon. At his 1993 trial, he did not deny committing the attack but argued voluntary intoxication as a defense, claiming his drug and alcohol use prevented him from forming the necessary intent for first-degree murder. However, the jury rejected this defense and found him guilty on all charges, sentencing him to death along with additional sentences for burglary and assault. For nearly a decade, Fisher appealed his conviction citing legal errors and ineffective counsel, but all courts upheld his sentence. In prison, he was considered a model inmate and eventually accepted full responsibility, apologizing to Angela's family in a clemency appeal. He was executed by lethal injection on the night of March 9, 2001, at the Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina, at age 39. There was no gubernatorial intervention or last-minute legal stays. When asked for his last words, he said, "There is still love, mercy, and justice." During the execution, which followed standard protocol, Fisher appeared to convulse and open his eyes after losing consciousness, suggesting possible complications, but was pronounced dead at 9:21 p.m. His sister, Sally Irvin, was present as a witness. Clifton A. White. In the early morning of May 6, 1989, Clifton A. White, 30 years old, brutally murdered 28-year-old Kimberly Ewing at her home in Charlotte, North Carolina, after a 4-day cocaine binge. Following a previous argument and under the influence of drugs, White broke into the residence, waited for Ewing, and when she returned, he beat her, tied her with an electrical cord, and killed her with a fireplace tool. Her body was found naked, showing signs of extreme violence and humiliation. White stole several items in the victim's car, which he later traded for more drugs. The crime was discovered hours later by Ewing's roommate. He was tried in August 1990 and sentenced to death after being convicted of first-degree murder, kidnapping, armed robbery, auto theft, and burglary. However, in 1992, the North Carolina Supreme Court overturned the conviction due to procedural errors involving inadmissible evidence. In a second trial in 1994, White was once again found guilty on all charges and sentenced to death. During the sentencing phase, White expressed remorse, read a letter sent to his mother, and admitted he deserved life in prison. His attorneys argued he had been the victim of severe abuse in childhood, lived with an alcoholic mother, witnessed extreme violence, and had been raped in prison. His drug addiction worsened after he stopped taking medication for hypothyroidism. His sister had tried to prevent the tragedy by alerting authorities about White's mental and emotional decline, but her warnings went unheeded. Shortly thereafter, Kimberly Ewing was murdered. Governor Mike Easley denied clemency, and the U.S. Supreme Court rejected 3 appeals. The execution was scheduled for 2 a.m. on August 24, 2001, at Central Prison in Raleigh. Clifton A. White was executed by lethal injection. He was 43 years old. For his last meal, he requested 2 large sausage and pepperoni pizzas and a soft drink. In his final words, he said, "I'm very sorry for what happened." He was pronounced dead at 2:23 a.m. Ronald Wayne Fry. In January 1993, Ronald Wayne Fry, 34 years old, brutally murdered his landlord, Ralph Childress, 70, in Catawba County, North Carolina. Fry, a construction laborer, rented a trailer owned by Childress and, despite a relationship that went beyond a commercial one, struggled to pay rent. Childress had given him several eviction notices in the months leading up to the crime, attempting to have Fry leave the property without success. On the night of January 23rd, Childress and his brother Leroy signed and posted eviction notices on the trailer. The following early morning, Fry attacked Childress with a pair of scissors, stabbing him 6 times in the neck and chest, leaving the scissors embedded in the body. The victim was found dead by Leroy around 8 a.m., with the crime scene showing signs of a struggle, but no evidence of forced entry. Physical evidence implicated Fry. His blood was found at the scene, on a knife, and on the victim's weapon, while Childress's blood was found on Fry's jacket. Additionally, a fingerprint of Fry and the victim's empty wallet were found at the scene. Witnesses revealed that Fry had tried to recruit a drug dealer to rob Childress before the murder, and after the crime he was able to purchase drugs with large amounts of cash, presumably from the robbery. Fry was arrested 3 days later and tried for first-degree murder and armed robbery. During the trial, the defense presented little evidence in the guilt phase, and Fry was found guilty. He was sentenced to death that same year. However, his trial was heavily criticized due to poor legal representation. His court-appointed attorney, Tom Portwood, was a severe alcoholic who admitted to consuming 12 shots of rum daily during the trial. He was found with a blood alcohol level of 0.44 after a car accident while still handling the case. On August 31, 2001, Ronald Fry was executed by lethal injection at Central Prison in Raleigh at age 42. There was no gubernatorial intervention. In his final words, Fry asked forgiveness from the victim's family. "I would ask the Childress family to forgive me for my sins against them." David Jr. Ward. In April 1991, David Jr. Ward, 30 years old, was contacted by Wesley Harris in Greenville, North Carolina, to participate in the robbery of Dorothy Mae Smith, who managed a convenience store alongside her husband. Under the influence of crack cocaine, Ward agreed to Harris's criminal plan, with Harris providing a .32 caliber pistol, while Ward was given a .22 caliber rifle. On the night of April 3, 1991, around 10:30 p.m., both men hid armed in the bushes in front of Smith's house, waiting for her to arrive with approximately $4,000 in cash from the store. When 45-year-old Dorothy Mae Smith arrived and got out of her truck, Harris and Ward began shooting. Smith was hit 5 times and died on the spot, while Harris took the cash box and fled. The next day, Ward was arrested on unrelated charges and in his statement confessed involvement in the crime, providing key details that led to Harris's capture. Ward fully cooperated with authorities, helping them recover the weapons used in the murder, which were found in Harris's apartment along with some of the stolen money. It is noteworthy that Ward never received any share of the loot, as Harris kept all the money. Harris was tried first and sentenced to life imprisonment. A month later, Ward faced trial for the same crime, but his court-appointed defense attorney lacked experience in serious criminal cases, specializing instead in real estate and having never handled a first-degree murder case. Despite no evidence that Ward had obtained any money from the robbery, the jury sentenced him to death based on the aggravating factor of pecuniary gain. Ward always maintained that he deliberately fired shots to the side to avoid harming Smith. Court records indicated bullet holes were found at the base of a nearby air conditioning unit, although it was never definitively determined which weapon caused those shots. On October 12, 2001, Ward was executed by lethal injection at Central Prison in Raleigh at 2:17 a.m. He was 40 years old at the time of his death. His last meal consisted of a well-done T-bone steak, mixed salad with French dressing, French fries, Texas toast, and iced tea. Although he made a final statement, the exact content of his last words was not recorded. John Hardy Rose. In January 1991, John Hardy Rose, 32 years old and recently settled in Robbinsville, North Carolina, lived with his sister and her boyfriend directly above the apartment of Patricia Stewart, a 24-year-old woman who worked at a local store. On January 3rd, Patricia disappeared after being dropped off at her home around 11:30 p.m. by a co-worker. Her absence was reported on January 6th. Upon inspecting Patricia's apartment, the sheriff found everything in order, except for the missing bedsheets and small bloodstains. Rose initially denied any connection to Patricia, but later admitted to recent sexual encounters with her, though no one could confirm this. Police recovered items from Rose's and his sister's vehicles containing blood consistent with Patricia's. On January 15th, under pressure from his mother, Rose revealed the location of Patricia's body on his grandmother's farm, where it was found. Arrested and read his rights, Rose confessed to killing Patricia after consuming alcohol and marijuana. According to his account, the victim threatened to accuse him of rape if he tried to leave her, which triggered his rage. He brutally attacked her, stabbing her 5 times, beating, and strangling her to death. He also confessed to violent sexual assaults and torture. The body was wrapped in the missing sheets, transported in Rose's vehicles, then burned and buried on his grandmother's farm. Rose had a prior record for attempted rape and suffered from severe sexual disorders, including voyeurism and sadism. He admitted to invading numerous homes to carry out violent and sexual fantasies. He was formally charged on February 4, 1991, and after a trial in Haywood County, was convicted of first-degree murder. On May 12, 1992, he was sentenced to death. His last meal consisted of 2 cheeseburgers, French fries, and a milkshake. John Hardy Rose was executed by lethal injection on November 30, 2001, at Central Prison in Raleigh at age 43. Despite a clemency petition sent by a papal envoy, Governor Mike Easley denied the request. His last words before execution were, "I know I have been forgiven by the people who love me. I have already told you, they have told me. I feel everything has been said." Ernest W. Basden. In January 1992, Ernest W. Basden, a 49-year-old carpenter residing in Jones County, North Carolina, was going through a difficult period marked by depression and addictions following the early loss of his mother. He was recruited to murder Billy Carlisle White, a well-respected insurance agent, on orders from White's wife, Sylvia White, who planned to collect life insurance policies after years of failed poisoning attempts motivated by an extramarital affair and financial gain. Sylvia involved James Linwood Taylor, Basden's nephew, to organize the crime. Initially, Basden refused to be the executioner, but after Sylvia's insistence and the offer of $300, he accepted. On January 20, 1992, Taylor posed as a businessman to lure Billy White to a remote road, while Basden, under the influence of drugs and alcohol provided by Taylor, waited with a shotgun. When the victim arrived, Basden fired 2 shots causing mortal wounds, though Billy White did not die instantly and suffered until his death. Afterwards, both perpetrators stole belongings from the victim and destroyed the weapon by throwing its remains into the Neuse River. Shortly after, Basden voluntarily surrendered and fully cooperated with authorities. He was the first to be tried, facing challenges due to his terminal illness and the late withdrawal of his defense attorney. The jury found him guilty, acknowledging mitigating and aggravating factors, and recommended the death penalty, which was imposed on April 9, 1993. His co-defendants, Sylvia White and James Taylor, received life sentences. During his time on death row, Basden underwent a spiritual transformation, becoming an active Christian and mentor to other inmates, promoting opposition to the death penalty. On December 6, 2002, at age 49, Basden was executed by lethal injection at Central Prison in Raleigh. His clemency request was denied by Governor Mike Easley despite family pleas. In his final words, Basden stated, "I killed Billy White. I regret it, and I pray that his family comes to forgive me and lets time heal their wounds, and that's all we can do." Desmond Keith Carter. In March 1992, Desmond Keith Carter, 24 years old and originally from Rhode Island, struggled with severe drug addiction, primarily to crack and cocaine. After his mother left when he was just 3, he lived with his maternal grandmother before moving to North Carolina with his paternal grandmother. Carter had a significant criminal record, having served 4 years of a 12-year sentence for kidnapping and assault in Long Island, New York, and was on parole. On the morning of March 9, 1992, under the combined influence of alcohol, crack, and tranquilizers, Carter went to the home of his neighbor Helen Purdy, a 71-year-old woman residing in Eden, Rockingham County, North Carolina. Armed with a butcher knife, he sought money to buy more drugs. According to his statement, Mrs. Purdy initially agreed to lend him money, but changed her mind upon seeing the knife. Carter claimed she tried to push him, and in the ensuing struggle he fell onto the knife. However, the autopsy revealed Helen Purdy was stabbed 13 times, disproving the accidental version. After the attack, Carter took $15 that the victim had left near the phone and used it to buy cocaine. He later discarded the knife in a field near his home. Police suspected him early on because he was the victim's neighbor and had a knife wound on his leg. He initially lied, claiming 4 white men had stabbed him, but confessed the murder with details the next day. He was tried and convicted in Rockingham Superior Court for first-degree murder on 2 grounds: premeditation and deliberation, and murder during the commission of a felony. He was also sentenced to 40 consecutive years for the robbery. In July 1993, the jury unanimously recommended the death penalty, which the judge imposed. On December 10, 2002, at 2:17 a.m., Desmond Keith Carter was executed by lethal injection at Central Prison in Raleigh, aged 35. His last meal consisted of 2 cheeseburgers, a steak sandwich, and 2 Coca-Colas, for which he paid $4.20 from his prison account. In his final words before execution, Carter said, "The only thing I would like to say is that I apologize to Mrs. Purdy's family, and I would like to apologize to my family for the disappointment and pain I have caused throughout my life." Present at the execution chamber were his father, William Conway, his defense attorney, Bill Osteen, and family members of the victim. Before losing consciousness, Carter blew a kiss to his father and whispered, "I love you, Dad." Meanwhile, his half-brother Tyrone Wallace participated in anti-death penalty demonstrations outside the prison. William Quentin Jones. In March 1987, William Quentin Jones, 18 years old, committed a murder during an armed robbery at the fast fare convenience store located in Raleigh, North Carolina. That night, just before midnight on March the 7th, Jones, wearing a ski mask and armed with a 9mm Uzi pistol, entered the store. He had been using drugs for several weeks leading up to the crime. He fired between 3 and 6 shots inside the store, seriously wounding Orlando Watson, who survived after surgery, and killing Edward Peebles, a 32-year-old construction worker who was inside drinking coffee after playing music with his friends. Jones demanded that clerk Charles Taylor open the cash register, threatening to kill him. When Taylor couldn't do it, Jones tore the register out and dragged it outside by its electric cord. The bullets that struck Peebles ruptured his aorta and a major vein, causing massive bleeding that led to his death. Jones pled guilty to first-degree murder, armed robbery, and assault with a deadly weapon with intent to inflict serious injury. He was sentenced to death for the murder, 40 years for the robbery, and 20 years for the assault. In the new hearing, Jones presented mitigating factors such as mental and emotional disturbance due to drug use and expressed remorse, but the jury rejected these arguments and reimposed the death penalty. The sentence was upheld by the state Supreme Court. His last meal before execution consisted of a tossed salad with shredded carrots, cheese, Thousand Island dressing, and a soft drink. The execution was carried out by lethal injection at 2 a.m. on August 22, 2003, at Central Prison in Raleigh. Jones was 34 years old. Governor Mike Easley denied clemency. His final words were, "I'm sorry, I'm out. I love y'all," followed by an appeal for mercy in both English and Arabic. Henry Lee Hunt. In September 1984, Henry Lee Hunt, 39 years old, took part in a contract killing in Robeson County, North Carolina, as part of a conspiracy orchestrated so that Dottie Locklear could collect a $25,000 life insurance payout following the death of her bigamous husband, Jackie Ransom. Hunt carried out the murder on September 8th and, the next day, demanded the agreed payment, threatening to kill those involved if he wasn't paid. A few days later, upon learning that Larry Jones had been speaking to the police about the crime, Hunt also coldly murdered him on the night of September the 14th to silence him and protect the conspiracy. Henry Lee Hunt was charged with 2 counts of capital murder and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, corresponding to the killings of Jackie Ransom and Larry Jones. After trials and multiple appeals, he was sentenced to death. The execution was carried out on September 12, 2003, at 2 a.m. at Central Prison in Raleigh by lethal injection. Hunt was 58 years old. Governor Mike Easley denied clemency. One day before the execution, on August 29th, a judge ordered DNA testing on a cigarette butt found at one of the crime scenes, said to be of the same brand Hunt smoked. This cigarette butt was the only physical evidence directly linking him to the murder. However, on September 4th, the state laboratory reported that it was unable to extract usable genetic material from the item. His final meal consisted of a medium Domino's pizza with pepperoni, hamburger, Canadian bacon, sausage, onions, mushrooms, and green peppers, accompanied by a 20-ounce Coca-Cola. Henry Lee Hunt's final words before execution were brief and defiant. "It's a good day to die." Joseph Earl Bates. In August 1990, Joseph Earl Bates, 22 years old, committed a brutal murder in Yadkin County, North Carolina. He offered a ride to Charles Edwin Jenkins, whom he struck with a shovel, tied up, and transported to a remote campsite, where he ultimately shot him in the neck and dumped his body into the Yadkin River. The corpse was discovered on August 25th, showing signs of violence and with the victim's limbs bound. The next day, Bates confessed to the crime in a 23-page statement, admitting to both the murder and the kidnapping. He was first tried in February 1991 and sentenced to death, but the sentence was overturned on appeal. In a second trial held in 1994, he was once again found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. The trial emphasized the heinous nature of the crime and the fact that it occurred in the context of a kidnapping. Joseph Earl Bates was executed on September 26, 2003, at 2:14 a.m. at Central Prison in Raleigh by lethal injection. He was 35 years old at the time of his death. Governor Mike Easley denied clemency. His last meal consisted of a traditional Southern menu, fried pork chops, French fries, hush puppies, apple pie, and both Pepsi and Dr. Pepper. When given the opportunity to make a final statement, Bates calmly said, "I haven't really given it any thought. Let's see. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 6, they can read it." With that brief biblical reference, he chose to end his life without further explanation, leaving the interpretation to those who heard him. The execution proceeded without incident. Bates was strapped to the gurney and administered the lethal drugs according to protocol. He was officially pronounced dead at 2:14 a.m. No visible signs of distress were reported. Edward Ernest Hartman. On June 3, 1993, Edward Ernest Hartman, 28, coldly murdered 77-year-old Herman Smith Sr. at his home in rural Northampton County, North Carolina. While the victim was sitting in his recliner watching television, Hartman approached from behind and shot him in the head with a .38 caliber pistol that belonged to Smith himself. After committing the murder, Hartman stole cash and checks from the house and fled. Days later, he returned to the property, retrieved the body, and buried it in a 6-foot-deep grave behind the house, inside a barn. Hartman knew Smith through his mother, Dot Simpson, who had lived with and cared for the elderly man sometime earlier. Smith was frail, suffered from emphysema, and weighed less than 100 pounds. Hartman had told a friend he believed Smith was wealthy and carried large amounts of money. On the night of the crime, Hartman had consumed 16 beers. In October 1994, he was tried for first-degree murder and armed robbery. His attorneys presented 5 mitigating factors, including chronic alcoholism, physical and sexual abuse during childhood, and a violent family environment. Hartman had been sexually abused by male relatives, began drinking at the age of 11, and was beaten by 3 of his mother's husbands. Nevertheless, the jury concluded that the premeditated robbery and murder outweighed any mitigating circumstances, and on October 24, 1994, he was sentenced to death, along with an additional 40 years in prison for the robbery. During the trial, the prosecution repeatedly referred to Hartman's homosexuality, even in unrelated contexts, which the defense denounced as an attempt to introduce bias and prejudice. However, the appeals based on this argument were rejected by the courts. The execution of Edward Ernest Hartman was carried out on October 3, 2003, at 2:14 a.m. at Central Prison in Raleigh. He was 39 years old. Governor Mike Easley denied the clemency request at around 8 p.m. the previous evening, after the U.S. Supreme Court declined to review the case. His last meal consisted of a Greek salad, linguine with clam sauce, garlic bread, cherry-topped cheesecake, and a Coca-Cola. Hartman did not offer any final words. He was secured to a gurney and received the lethal injection according to standard state protocol. No visible signs of suffering were observed, and his death was officially declared at 2:14 a.m. It was the 57th execution in the United States in 2003 and the 27th in North Carolina since the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976. Joseph Timothy Keel. On July 10, 1990, around 10 p.m., Joseph Timothy "Timmy" Keel, 26, arrived at the mobile home of Aubrey Thurman on a pig farm located in Edgecombe County, North Carolina, claiming that his father-in-law, John Simmons, had been shot. When authorities arrived at the scene, they found 62-year-old Simmons seated in a truck with a gunshot wound to the right side of his head. Keel's shirt was stained with blood, immediately identifying him as the primary suspect. Keel was arrested shortly after the crime. His legal process extended over several years due to an appeal related to a jury instruction, resulting in a second trial held in March 1993. In that new trial, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder and recommended the death penalty. On March 30, 1993, the court formally imposed the death sentence. During the sentencing phase, the defense presented evidence regarding Keel's mental condition. It was revealed that he suffered from organic brain damage and had an IQ placing him within the range of intellectual disability, possibly due to injuries sustained during pregnancy or from later accidents. Despite these mitigating factors, the jury found that the circumstances of the murder outweighed them. Joseph Timothy Keel's execution was scheduled for November 7, 2003. In the early hours of that morning, at 2 a.m., he was taken to the lethal injection chamber at Central Prison in Raleigh. He was administered the state's standard 3-drug protocol: a sedative, a paralytic agent, and a compound to stop the heart. The execution proceeded without visible complications, and death was officially declared at 2:18 a.m. He was 39 years old at the time of his death. Governor Mike Easley denied the clemency request the previous evening, after the United States Supreme Court also rejected Keel's final appeal. His last meal consisted of fried chicken, a biscuit, rice, a Diet Coke, and a boneless T-bone steak with mushrooms and onions. Keel did not deliver any final words before the injection. The procedure was carried out without incident and with no visible signs of suffering, taking approximately 8 minutes from the first injection to the official declaration of death. John Dennis Daniels. On January 17, 1990, John Dennis Daniels, 33, went to the home of his aunt, 77-year-old Isabel Daniels Crawford, in Charlotte, North Carolina. According to his later statements, his intention was to ask her for money and request that she house his wife and child. However, Mrs. Crawford refused. Daniels reacted violently. He struck her, dragged her to the bedroom, and strangled her with an electrical cord. He then left her body on the floor and fled the scene. The crime shocked both the community and his own family. The victim was an elderly, vulnerable woman, and her killer was her own nephew. After the body was discovered, Daniels confessed the murder to police, leading to his immediate prosecution. He was tried in the Mecklenburg County Superior Court and, on September 24, 1990, was found guilty of first-degree murder. The court imposed the death penalty. Daniels appealed the conviction, but the North Carolina Supreme Court upheld both the verdict and the sentence. On July 29, 1994, the High Court formally affirmed the capital sentence, concluding that there were no irregularities in any phase of the trial, including the evaluation of aggravating and mitigating factors. After spending more than a decade on death row, the state's Department of Correction scheduled Daniels' execution for November 14, 2003. In the early hours of that morning, at 2 a.m., he was taken to the lethal injection chamber at Central Prison in Raleigh. There, he was strapped to a gurney and administered the standard 3-drug protocol: a sedative, a muscle relaxant, and finally, a drug to stop the heart. The procedure lasted only a few minutes and showed no visible signs of suffering. Death was officially declared at 2:15 a.m. Daniels was 46 years old. Governor Mike Easley denied the request for clemency the night before the execution. Unlike other inmates, Daniels did not offer any final statement. His last meal consisted of a ribeye steak, a baked potato with sour cream and butter, pecan pie, dinner rolls, hush puppies, and a soft drink. Robbie James Lyons. On September 25, 1993, 21-year-old Robbie James Lyons entered a small grocery store in Forsyth County, North Carolina, with a .22 caliber handgun in hand. Inside was 48-year-old Stephen Wilson Stafford, who operated the business. Without warning, Lyons shot Stafford 5 times, killing him within seconds in what authorities determined was an attempted robbery. After committing the murder, Lyons fled the scene still holding the weapon. The brutality and swiftness of the act shocked the community. An eyewitness nearby saw Lyons hurriedly exit the store with the gun in plain sight, which led to his quick identification. In addition, the person who accompanied him that night confirmed that Lyons was the shooter. Lyons was arrested the following day and charged with first-degree murder under the felony murder rule, as well as armed robbery. His trial took place in the Forsyth County Superior Court and concluded on May 6, 1994, with a guilty verdict. During the sentencing phase, the defense presented evidence of his mental health conditions, including diagnoses of bipolar disorder and antisocial personality disorder, as well as a history of substance abuse from an early age. Despite these mitigating factors, the jury determined that the aggravating circumstances, including the violent nature of the killing and use of a firearm, outweighed any consideration in his favor. That same day, he was sentenced to death. While on death row, Lyons converted to Islam. In the days leading up to his execution, his attorneys submitted clemency requests to Governor Mike Easley, who agreed to meet with both the defense team and the victim's family. However, the governor ultimately denied all requests for commutation. The execution was scheduled for December 5, 2003 at Central Prison in Raleigh. At 2 a.m., Robbie James Lyons was escorted to the lethal injection chamber, where he was secured to the gurney. He was administered the state's standard 3-drug protocol: a sedative to induce unconsciousness, a paralytic agent, and finally a drug to stop the heart. The procedure proceeded without complications, and his death was officially declared at 2:17 a.m. He was 31 years old. His last meal consisted of pizza and lasagna prepared in accordance with Islamic dietary laws, accompanied by a Pepsi. His final words before death reflected his religious conversion. "It is from Allah that I come, and it is to Allah that I return. If my death brings another person happiness, then I'm happy for them." Raymond Dale Rousey. In March 1992, 20-year-old Raymond Dale Rousey took part in a violent armed robbery at a Circle K convenience store located in Alamance County, North Carolina. During the assault, Rousey shot Howard Rue Sikorsky, a 20-year-old store clerk at point-blank range. He fired 6 times. The motive, to steal just $57.54 and a handful of pornographic magazines. The following morning, Sikorsky's body was found lifeless on the store floor, with multiple gunshot wounds. The investigation progressed quickly when Raymond Steele, Rosie's half-brother, was arrested shortly after attempting to pay with a marked $2 bill stolen from the Circle K cash register. Under pressure from investigators, Steele confessed his involvement and testified that Rousey was the shooter. In exchange for his cooperation, Steele received a reduced sentence for second-degree murder. Rousey was arrested the next day and charged with first-degree murder and armed robbery. At the trial held in October 1993, the prosecution presented forensic evidence, including a bloody shoe print matching Rousey's shoes, as well as testimonies confirming he had the murder weapon before and after the crime. Although 2 inmates claimed to have heard Steele say that Rousey was not the one who pulled the trigger, the jury did not find that version credible. On October 1, 1993, Rousey was formally sentenced to death. On January 9, 2004, at 2:23 a.m., Raymond Dale Rousey was executed by lethal injection at Central Prison in Raleigh. He was 32 years old. Governor Mike Easley, as in previous cases, reviewed the clemency request, but denied it the night before the execution. Rousey offered no final statement before his death. His last meal was simple: pizza, chicken wings, 2 packs of peanut M&Ms, and a Pepsi. Sammy Crystal Perkins. Sammy Crystal Perkins, 38 years old, committed a serious crime in the early hours of April 19, 1992, in Pitt County, North Carolina, by suffocating Lashina Renee JoJo Moore, a 7-year-old girl, inside the bedroom of his girlfriend. After the body was found, Perkins was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and rape. On July 27, 1993, a jury in the Pitt County Superior Court found him guilty, and on December 15 of the same year, he was sentenced to death. During the trial, the defense presented mitigating factors related to drug use and possible psychiatric disorders, but the jury concluded that the aggravating circumstances due to the brutality of the crime and the vulnerability of the victim prevailed. His last meal before execution consisted of fried chicken, sweet potato pie, French fries, and a Coca-Cola. The execution was scheduled for October 8, 2004, at 2 a.m. in the lethal injection chamber of Central Prison in Raleigh. Governor Mike Easley denied the commutation request hours before. Perkins, aged 51, was officially declared dead at 2:14 a.m., following the lethal injection. His last words were, "I would like to say, Sa, I love my mother, all my brothers and sisters, and all my children. I'll see y'all on the other side. Thank you." During the execution, Perkins was restrained on a gurney and administered 3 drugs in sequence according to North Carolina's standard protocol: a barbiturate sedative, a paralytic, and potassium chloride. The process lasted approximately 14 minutes without visible signs of suffering. Charles Wesley Roche. Charles Wesley Roche, 25 years old, committed 2 serious crimes in September 1999 in North Carolina. On September 29th, after a fight in a rural area of Alexander County, Roche shot Chad McKinley Watt, 22, in the head with a shotgun after Watt's vehicle broke down. The following day, together with his accomplice, Christopher Wayne Lippard, he broke into the Phillips family home on Rabbit Skin Road, Haywood County, in an attempted robbery that ended with the massacre of 5 family members. During their attempted escape, their truck broke down near Earl and Cora Phillips's residence. Roche and Lippard entered the house, threatened the couple, tied their hands with duct tape, and stole weapons in the family's 1986 Ford truck. When Lippard crashed the vehicle, he returned to the house and a violent confrontation ensued. Roche first shot Eddie Phillips, the couple's son, then, after forcing open a door, shot Mitzi Phillips, Eddie's wife, and their 14-year-old daughter Katie. Finally, both attacked Earl and Cora Phillips, who also died from gunshot wounds to the head. Roche was arrested near the scene and confessed to the murders. In April 2001, he was sentenced to death for the murders of Mitzi and Katie Phillips, while receiving life imprisonment without parole for the deaths of Earl, Cora, and Eddie Phillips. Additionally, in Alexander County, he was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of Chad Watt. At 1:51 a.m., Roche was taken on a stretcher to the execution chamber. The prison warden gave the order to proceed at 1:58 a.m., at which time Roche began praying aloud. His eyes closed, he took a deep breath and stopped breathing. At 2:06 a.m., his complexion faded, and he was officially declared dead minutes later. No signs of suffering were recorded during the lethal injection process. His last meal consisted of sirloin steak, breaded shrimp, salad with blue cheese dressing, a honey bun, and vanilla Coca-Cola. After waiving most of his appeals, Roche was classified as a volunteer for execution. Governor Mike Easley denied clemency the night before the procedure. He was executed by lethal injection on October 22, 2004, at 2 a.m. in Central Prison in Raleigh, and was officially declared dead at 2 a.m., age 30. While lying on the gurney, Roche winked and smiled, and repeatedly said, "I love you," to his sister and fiancée. When the order to proceed was given at 1:58 a.m., Charles Roche began praying aloud and looking up to the sky. He said, "I'm leaving, I'm leaving." Frank Ray Chandler. In the early morning hours of December 11, 1992, 20-year-old Frank Ray Chandler forcibly entered the home of Doris Poor, a 90-year-old widow who lived alone in Mount Airy, North Carolina. He was searching for marijuana, mistakenly believing that drugs were hidden in the residence. Chandler cut through the mesh of the back door and removed the latch to gain entry. When the elderly woman encountered him in the darkness, Chandler struck her in the head with such force that he fractured her skull, killing her instantly. The following day, her housekeeper found the body and alerted the family. The investigation uncovered Chandler's fingerprints on the kitchen door. His cousin testified that he had seen Chandler leave the house that night and that Chandler later asked him to remain silent. A cellmate later testified that Chandler confessed to the crime, describing how he attacked the victim and then placed her in her bed. He was arrested a few weeks later. In July 1993, he was convicted of first-degree murder, attempted larceny, and first-degree burglary, and was sentenced to death under the aggravating circumstance of pecuniary gain. However, Judge Robert Orr dissented, stating that there was no clear evidence that the motive was financial. On November 12, 2004, Chandler was executed by lethal injection at Central Prison in Raleigh. He was 32 years old. He did not offer any final words and requested that his family not be present. His attorneys described the execution as distressing. His last meal was a medium pizza with various toppings and a glass of cold milk. He was pronounced dead at 2:13 a.m. William D. Powell. On October 31, 1991, 45-year-old William Dillard Powell broke into the Pantry, a convenience store in Shelby, North Carolina. When he demanded the money from the cash register, 54-year-old Mary Gladden refused to hand it over. In response, Powell struck her in the head with a tool, causing her death. Powell was identified by a witness the following day and was arrested on November 16, 1991. During the trial held in April 1993 at the Cleveland County Superior Court, he was found guilty of first-degree murder committed during a robbery and armed robbery. The jury recommended the death penalty, determining that the murder was committed for pecuniary gain without finding any mitigating circumstances. Prior to this tragic act, Powell had served in the United States Army, worked as a volunteer firefighter and emergency technician, and devoted much of his time to caring for his disabled son, actively participating in the school's parent council. On March 11, 2005, at 2 a.m., William Dillard Powell was executed by lethal injection at Central Prison in Raleigh at the age of 58. Clemency was denied the night before by Governor Mike Easley after the U.S. Supreme Court refused to grant a stay. His last meal consisted of a hamburger and a 20-ounce Pepsi. Powell did not make a final statement when given the opportunity. The execution followed North Carolina's standard protocol and concluded without incident. He was pronounced dead at 2 a.m., showing no visible signs of distress during the process. Earl J. Richmond Jr. In April 1991, Earl J. Richmond Jr., a former Army sergeant, brutally murdered Lisa Ann Nadeau, a 24-year-old specialist, in her residence at Fort Dix, New Jersey, initiating a series of homicides that would ultimately lead to his execution 14 years later. On November 2nd of the same year, in Fayetteville, North Carolina, Richmond raped and strangled Helissa Stewart Hayes, the ex-wife of a friend, and then murdered her two children, Philip, 8, and Darian, 7, using electrical cords and scissors. He was not identified as a suspect until April 1992, when a DNA test confirmed his responsibility, and he confessed to the crimes, stating he had intentionally left evidence because he wanted to be caught. On May 6, 2005, at the age of 43, Richmond was executed by lethal injection at 2 a.m. at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina. He was pronounced dead at 2:19 a.m. Governor Mike Easley had denied clemency, allowing the execution to proceed. Richmond declined a final meal. In a statement to 78 death row inmates on May 3rd, he wrote, "I don't want medication, no Valium, no last meal. My victims didn't get a last meal." His final words before being executed were, "I would like to extend my deepest apologies to all the families of the victims and their loved ones. I would like to say that I am not a man who shirks his responsibilities. I would like to say that I hope now, through my death, you all will be able to move on with your lives. Thank you, and God bless you." Stephen Van McCone. In June 1990, 19-year-old Stephen Van McCone murdered his mother and stepfather at their home in Surry County, North Carolina. The day before the crime, McCone had been drinking alcohol and taking LSD, exhibiting erratic behavior at a party. That night, after arguing with his mother about money, he went down to the basement. Hours later, around 12:30 a.m., gunshots were heard. His stepbrother, Wesley Jr., witnessed McCone struggling with Mr. Adams and then shooting him with a shotgun when Adams tried to protect him. After the killings, McCone broke down in tears, expressing remorse, and was arrested later that same night. During the trial in February 1991, McCone admitted to the murders but claimed voluntary intoxication as his defense, arguing that the combination of drugs and alcohol had impaired his ability to form the intent necessary for premeditated murder. The jury rejected this defense and found him guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of assault with intent to kill. On March 7, 1991, he was sentenced to death for both murders. His execution took place on November 11, 2005, by lethal injection at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina. He was 35 years old. Before his execution, he was offered a final meal consisting of a medium porterhouse steak, steak fries, a slice of chocolate cheesecake, and a 20-ounce Mountain Dew, which he ate at 5 p.m. that day. Stephen Van McCone did not make any official final statement, but he appeared to mouth the words, "I'm so sorry," to his stepbrother, Wesley Adams Jr., who supported the execution and traveled from Ohio to witness it. Elias Hannah Sirianni. In July 1990, 52-year-old Elias Hannah Sirianni brutally murdered his wife, 40-year-old Teresa Yusuf Sirianni, in Charlotte, North Carolina, stabbing her 28 times with a screwdriver through the window of her car, while their 10-year-old son watched from the passenger seat. Sirianni, an Assyrian Christian originally from Jordan, had immigrated to the United States with Teresa after an arranged marriage. Over the years, their relationship deteriorated due to cultural changes Teresa embraced after settling in the U.S. In 1990, she filed for divorce and obtained a restraining order against him. On July 28th, as Teresa returned home from work, Sirianni ambushed her in the driveway, attacked her viciously, and fled the scene. Teresa succumbed to her injuries 28 days later. Sirianni was arrested that same night. During the 1991 trial, Sirianni denied premeditation and offered an alternate version of events, claiming that his wife had attacked him first. The jury, however, rejected his account and found him guilty of first-degree murder under the theory of premeditation and deliberation. Despite the presentation of 8 mitigating circumstances during sentencing, the jury concluded that the crime was severe enough to warrant the death penalty. On June 12, 1991, Sirianni was sentenced to death. His execution was carried out on November 18, 2005, by lethal injection at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina. He was 67 years old. Sirianni declined a last meal, saying, "I don't want any food from this place," using it as a final protest against the system that would execute him. His final words were, "I want to thank God first for everything that happened in my life. I want to thank my children. I want to thank my family, especially my sister Odette. I want to thank all the beautiful friends who shared my suffering for 15 years and 4 months and encouraged me so much, especially Mr. and Mrs. Meg Eggleston, who became like a sister to me. She helped me accept everything. I thank all the staff, nurses, chaplains. I thank everyone." Kenneth Lee Boyd. In March 1988, 40-year-old Kenneth Lee Boyd murdered his estranged wife, 36-year-old Julie Curry Boyd, and his father-in-law, 57-year-old Thomas Dillard Curry, at Curry's residence in Stoneville, North Carolina. A Vietnam War veteran with a history of domestic conflict, Boyd had been drinking heavily when he told his children he intended to kill everyone in the house. He believed his wife was being unfaithful. That night, he entered the home through the back door with a firearm and shot Thomas, mistaking his silhouette in the dark. He then found Julie in the kitchen and shot her repeatedly in front of their children, one of whom was pinned beneath her body as Boyd continued firing. During the attack, one of his sons tried to disarm him but failed. Boyd left the house to reload, then returned to call 911, admitted to the murders, and asked to be arrested. More gunshots were heard during the call. Soon after, officers found Boyd emerging from a wooded area nearby with his hands raised, and he surrendered without resistance. The brutal double murder, committed in front of his children, led to his capital trial and eventual death sentence. Kenneth Boyd was executed on December 2, 2005, by lethal injection at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina. He was 57 years old. His last meal, eaten at 5 p.m. that day, included a medium New York strip steak, a baked potato with sour cream, a roll with butter, a salad with ranch dressing, and a Pepsi. Prison officials said he appeared satisfied with the meal. His final words were, "God bless everyone here." Before speaking those words, Boyd smiled at his daughter-in-law, Kathy Smith, the wife of one of his sons from a previous marriage, and at a minister from his home county. He asked Smith to take care of his son and 2 grandchildren. Through the thick glass separating the execution chamber from the witness room, she silently mouthed that her husband was waiting outside. Perry Diane Simpson. In August 1984, 21-year-old Perry Diane Simpson brutally murdered Reverend Jean Ernest Darter, a 92-year-old retired Baptist minister, at his home in Reidsville, North Carolina. Raised in the state care system, Simpson developed behavioral problems and substance abuse issues from a young age. On August 26th, he and his pregnant 16-year-old girlfriend, Stephanie Uri, were kindly received by the Reverend, who offered them food, drink, and assistance. The next day, both returned with the intent to rob him. After forcing entry, Simpson overpowered the elderly man, strangled him with belts, and, when no money was found, tortured him with a broken bottle and razor blades, causing death by strangulation and blood loss. They then stole several items before fleeing the scene. Simpson was arrested weeks later on an unrelated charge and eventually confessed to the crime in a 16-page written statement. In 1985, he pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, armed robbery, and conspiracy to commit murder. His sentence underwent multiple appeals. The first verdict was overturned due to procedural errors, and the second was reversed by the U.S. Supreme Court. Finally, in a third sentencing hearing in January 1993, the Rockingham County jury once again recommended the death penalty. Simpson was executed by lethal injection on January 20, 2006, at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina. He was 43 years old. His last meal consisted of a McDonald's McRib sandwich, a double cheeseburger from Wendy's, macaroni and cheese, cheesecake, and a Coca-Cola, all consumed prior to his execution. His final words before death were, "I want to say that I regret what I did. I regret for the victim and the families. I regret for my family. I regret for everyone." The execution lasted approximately 17 minutes from the start of the procedure until he was declared dead. Patrick L. Moody. In Thomasville, North Carolina, Patrick Moody conspired for several months with Wanda Robbins to murder her husband, Donnie Ray Robbins, in order to collect a $5,000 life insurance policy. Among the methods they considered were poisoning with mercury, hiring a hitman, and using a machete. On September 16th, Moody went to the Robbins residence posing as a potential buyer for Donnie's car. He lured him to a nearby field and, as Donnie leaned over the hood to measure the vehicle, Moody shot him in the back of the head with a .32 caliber pistol he had stolen the day before. The next morning, Wanda contacted the insurance company to request the payout. Moody was arrested the day after the murder and confessed after waiving his Miranda rights, even leading police to the murder weapon. During his July 1995 trial, he changed his plea to guilty of first-degree murder. Although he admitted to the killing, he claimed he had acted under Wanda's coercion, alleging she threatened to report him for outstanding arrest warrants in Florida if he didn't go through with the plan. The jury rejected this defense and recommended the death penalty. The court cited as aggravating factors Moody's prior history of violence and the financial motive behind the crime. While 6 mitigating factors were presented, they were not enough to prevent a capital sentence. Patrick Moody was executed by lethal injection at 2 a.m. on March 17, 2006, at Central Prison in Raleigh. His final meal, served at 5 p.m. the previous evening, included turkey with stuffing, a mixed salad with blue cheese dressing, strawberry cheesecake, and a Coca-Cola. His final words before execution were, "I'll see you in heaven. I'll see you up there." Willie Brown. Willie Brown Jr. was convicted of the armed robbery and murder of Valerie Ann Robertson Dixon, a store clerk in Williamston, North Carolina, in March 1983. On the morning of the crime, Brown was arrested while driving the victim's car. He was found in possession of a .32 caliber pistol, stolen cash, and Dixon's personal belongings. Hours later, Dixon's body was discovered on a rural road. She had been shot 6 times, most of the wounds inflicted while she lay face down. The autopsy concluded she died from blood loss within approximately 15 minutes. Brown had a serious criminal record, including prior robberies and an attempted murder of a police officer in Virginia. During his trial, he denied the killing and claimed he had simply found the car and the money, though he admitted to previous convictions. He was found guilty of first-degree murder and armed robbery, receiving the death penalty and an additional 40-year prison sentence. The case was marked by severe deficiencies in Brown's legal defense. His court-appointed attorneys had no experience with capital cases, failed to present evidence of his long-standing mental health issues, and did not contact family members who were willing to testify. Brown had been diagnosed with severe mental disorders from a young age, never received treatment, and had suffered abuse during his childhood. He also rejected a plea deal that could have spared him the death penalty, a decision influenced by delusions and poor legal counsel. His execution took place on April 21, 2006, by lethal injection in Raleigh. He was 61 years old. It was the first execution in North Carolina to use a BIS monitor to ensure he remained unconscious. Brown's final meal consisted of a T-bone steak, rice, rolls, and German chocolate cake. His last act was a silent gesture of love toward his brothers, who witnessed the execution. The procedure lasted 11 minutes and showed no visible signs of distress. Samuel R. Flippen. On the morning of February 12, 1994, Samuel Flippen was alone in his mobile home in Clemens, North Carolina, with his 2-year-old stepdaughter, Brittany, while his wife, Tina, went to work. Less than an hour later, Flippen called 911, reporting that the child had fallen from her chair and was having trouble breathing. Paramedics arrived to find Brittany in critical condition, pale, with grayish lips, dilated pupils, and labored breathing. Despite emergency medical efforts, she was pronounced dead at 10:51 a.m. at North Carolina Baptist Hospital. An autopsy revealed numerous internal and external injuries, including a severe tear in her liver and pancreas, consistent with violent trauma rather than a simple fall. During the trial, Flippen claimed Brittany had fallen accidentally, but the jury rejected his account. On March 6, 1995, he was convicted of first-degree murder. and the following day he was sentenced to death in Forsyth County Superior Court. Brittany's biological father opposed Flippen's execution. During the trial, he developed a respectful relationship with Flippen's parents and stated that having known the pain of losing a child, he did not want another family to suffer the same. He expressed that North Carolina did not need to execute Flippen for justice to be served. Samuel Flippen was executed by lethal injection at 2 a.m. on August 18, 2006, at Central Prison in Raleigh. He was 36 years old. In the final hours, both state and U.S. Supreme Court judges denied all appeals. A petition signed by 45 of his relatives failed to stop the execution, and Governor Mike Easley denied clemency. Flippen's last meal, served at 5 p.m. the evening before, included breaded shrimp, hush puppies, French fries, and a Coca-Cola. He did not give a formal final statement. When the curtains were drawn in the execution chamber, Flippen smiled at his parents through the thick glass and silently mouthed, "I love you," 3 times before closing his eyes.